Hey Blazers, this episode is brought to you by Audible.com and the Amazon Company. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/Blaze Entertainment.
Or visit the sponsor and supporters links on our website at entertheblaze.com. With over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Now let's start the show.
What's going on, Blazers? We are back with another episode of Blaze Entertainment Spotlight Edition. I'm your host, Kwame, joined by the beautiful, the melanin proficient, and I'm not going to say the on time because she is always on time. I just give her crap. Miss Free, what's going on?
I'm glad you finally admit it.
I'll find something, okay? And then we'll bring it back. It'll be a thing. But on this episode, we have a wonderful, awesome, love hearing her on her podcast with Zach Van Norman on the Once Upon a Fan podcast, Miss Ashley Benson. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. How are you guys?
Good. It's been a long day. It's Monday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
no,
for those who don't know,
that.
I don't know how you wouldn't know who Ashley Benson is because she's awesome. Please give us a little bit of a kind of background about who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Oof. Well, by day, I am an event planner for a law firm in Chicago, but by night, I am what you would call, I guess, a convention enthusiast. Mm-hmm. For the past 5 years, I've been heavily involved in many major conventions across the nation as a handler for celebrities, as a vendor, security, and press. And I just really like the atmosphere of seeing a large group of people together who really love something, are really passionate about something. So I try to find any way I can to participate in that.
Right on. And what got you into it?
Picture it, Sicily, 1922. No. Actually, it's really... Of course I do. It's my Italian heritage coming through, that spiciness. You gotta all be a little spicy. No, actually, it started in high school. It's a bit of a drawn out story. I won't try to bend your ear too much, but I was on the stage crew in high school. I was the youngest stage manager they had as a sophomore, and I was the only female. So I was basically bossing around upperclassmen guys, building sets, being, a manly man, doing all sorts of tech work and our variety shows with bands and things like that. And I really enjoyed it. It was something I was like, this is really cool. So going into college, I wanted to continue doing that, but I didn't want to commit to the theater program at my university. So I was kind of at a loss, and I discovered a student activities board. We called it the Student Activities Board. I think other universities have different names for it, but it's basically the group of nerds that puts on all the fun stuff on campus, outdoor movies, concerts, homecoming, things like that. And what sold me, funnily enough, is the current president was, the club fair where you go and everyone kind of shouts at you from their table, like, join our thing. He's like, do you want to stand outside at 3 o'clock in the morning moving around traffic cones in the middle of the street? And I was like, actually, yes, that sounds like a lot of fun. So I got very involved in that, and that was kind of the thing that I did in college. I was head of hospitality after my first year, so I was basically running the green rooms for all of the comedians and acts we would bring onto campus. And from there, I progressed to vice president of event planning and then vice president of operations. So I went from the planning side to more the logistics, again, the tech, the, wrapping cords and setting up stages and things like that. Unfortunately, when I graduated college, it was about the time that we were in a recession. So I was really struggling to find work with my degree. And on a complete whim, I was a big fan of the TV show Leverage. Like, ridiculously a big fan of the show, and they were putting on a convention in Portland where they filmed, and it was going to be where they filmed the finale. And I was just kind of in a slump. I wasn't feeling great about myself. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to scrape together all my cash. I'm going to go and I'm going to get the cheapest ticket they have. And the cheapest ticket was the volunteer ticket. And they ask you, like, oh, what do you do? Blah, blah, blah. And I put down what I had done with the Student Activities Board. And when I went to Portland, I got there, and the gentleman in charge of volunteering pulled me aside, and he's like, I need to talk to you. You need to come over here quick. And I thought, oh, God, I'm in trouble. They're going to kick me out. Somebody thinks they found out I'm a weirdo. I'm too much of a fan. But what he wanted was, he's like, listen, your credentials stand out to me. We need somebody in a sensitive position. Can you be Mark Shepard's handler for the day? And Mark Shepard, if you don't know, he plays Crowley on Supernatural. He was, what else? He was pretty much he's one of those guys who's in everything. He was on Doctor Who. He was on Warehouse 13. And he was obviously in Leverage. And my jaw hit the floor. And it was one of the most satisfying things that I'd ever done, because I felt like I was actually, not only that I had actually, was actually helping someone, but I was actually naturally good at what I was doing. I wasn't struggling. I wasn't getting rejected from job offers. I wasn't getting turned down for not having experience trying to find work. And that moment made me realize, well, I have the experience. Like, this may not be what my degree's in, but I have the experience, so why not do this? Mm-hmm. So I worked on getting employed as an event planner, and I ended up moving back to Chicago, and I'm working with the law firm I'm working with now. And I still kind of had an itch for conventions, but I didn't really do anything major until the television show Once Upon a Time came along. And again, a big fan. The television seems to motivate me. A big fan. And I wanted to go to Comic-Con, like the Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con. And I found out they have a volunteer program as well. And part of me was like, oh, I could do this, I could do that, I could do the other. And then I realized, well, why am I just playing this? Why aren't I doing this? Why am I not taking that big, that leap off the edge and putting myself out there and trying? And I did. And I ended up working, doing line management, which has become kind of my specialty, like, corralling people and being loud and working with crowds. And it all, I don't want to say it all went downhill, but it all kind of blossomed from there. I got really involved in the convention scene, and I started moving on to doing things with press, or I started working with different companies that represent actors. They need people to work their booths and work their signings, and again, managing crowds of people, and that's kind of where I am today.
Right on. Now, I know for me personally, like, one of the things that stood out to me in, I guess, your career was an article that you did for Once Upon a Fan. And that article stood out for me because it was about an episode in regards to an LGBT type issue that was going on, and kind of bringing awareness. And it was like the first kiss, between two girls on the show, and it was kind of a big deal. And you wrote an amazing article, by the way, and I thought it was very well written. It was to the point, and it was much needed. And I think that that's something that Disney and ABC need to continue to do in terms of showing more awareness to it. And then I also listened to your episode with you and Zach Norman on Once Upon a Fan podcast, and you were talking about it. And one of the things that stood out to me that you had said is, and also Zach had agreed with you on it, was being gay was one of the smallest things, if not the least, I guess, interesting things about yourself, because it's just who you are. It's not a topic for you. And I really resonated with that because, as somebody who is LGBT myself, it's not something that every day that we go through making a big damn deal about, as a lot of people think that we do. And so I found it really interesting that you kind of not only wrote that article, but also kind of, I guess, in a way, showing that it was a big deal that this is happening. It was a breakthrough for the community, but it doesn't change who you are as a person. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
I'm first off, thank you very much for your kind words about the article. That's probably the most raw I ever let myself be when writing a review or an article or anything. I tend to let my emotions go into my writing, because if you don't know, I also write television reviews for Spoiler TV. Currently, I'm writing about Emerald City, but in the past, I've written about Once Upon a Time in Wonderland and Penny Dreadful, and have done some movie reviews as well. And I'm always very mindful with that to be more towing the line. I'll be honest, but I want to show both sides of an argument, because one thing I cannot stand is when folks review things, they tend to only focus on the negative, or they tend to sugarcoat. And it's like, well, I'm not going to alienate one side or the other. Folks are coming for information. They want a real experience. And with that article you mentioned, that was probably the realest experience I could give, because I was drawing a lot from me personally. And I had mentioned in the article, just we didn't have things like that episode on television when I was growing up. Like, gay was not okay when I was growing up. It was comic relief. It was a very special episode. And it always kind of bothered me, because even at a very young age, I kind of knew something was different, but I didn't have a name for it, because it couldn't be this thing, this mysterious thing that I see on television that is apparently wrong. It couldn't be that, so I'm going to just push that away. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I really kind of took a step back myself and actually met other queer people and realized, no, gay is okay. But, and part of that, honestly, is realizing that real people aren't those stereotypes that you see on television. They aren't one facet or one attribute. And I think it's important, especially now when it's becoming, I don't want to say more accepted, when it's becoming more regular to have storylines about gay characters that aren't a coming out episode or an episode about AIDS or anything like that, to show that these are just, it's just a person who happens to like another person who's similar.
Right.
So.
Well said.
Cool. And I know that you said that you do television and movie reviews, and Kwame and I, there's a segment of our show where we like to do movie and television reviews as well. So my question for you would be, for people who wanted to get started in either writing or talking about movie and television reviews, what advice could you give them?
Good question.
How, it's like, how could they give a better review of a television show?
Well, I think be honest is important in giving a good review. If you didn't like something, or if something didn't work or click, be honest about it, but also explain yourself. Don't say, well, it sucked. Yeah, but why? What was it about? Well, I didn't think that it fleshed out this storyline this way. I thought that it could have expanded. Like, let's take, for example, my current beef with Emerald City. I like the idea of, and well, it's relevant. I like the idea of Emerald City, and I was very interested in them going off the beaten path. But for me, it was just a little too much. Where when we see these shows that have, they're reimaginings or retellings of familiar stories, we like little signposts. We like little nods to the audience, because that's the thing that's really big, I feel like, with television nowadays, is that folks love shows where they can kind of get a wink and a nod, and they feel like they're in on it. They're in with the writers. They're like, oh, that's for me. I get that.
Right.
And Emerald City started out doing that, and then I don't know if in the writing process they kind of very much moved away from that. And that kind of bothered me, because I found myself looking for those signposts and being lost. But going back to your question, I'd say definitely, if you want to be a reviewer that folks enjoy reading, I'd say be honest. And for me, to get out there writing, it sounds so cliche to say just write, but that's what you got to do. I started out writing for a smaller site, and it wasn't a show that I really particularly was excited about, but I was writing, And then I used that writing to kind of pitch myself for Spoiler TV. And again, I didn't get to write because I wanted to write about Once Upon a Time because that was really, this was about 3 or 4 years ago. So I was just getting into the show. It was really my passion. And they said, well, we've got a writer for that, but why don't you cover this, and that? And I'm like, you know what? Yeah, let me get in with the site. Let me do this. And it opened up a lot of doors for me in gaining press access to Sundance Film Festival. And I actually, on a whim, just I was like, oh, this sounds interesting. Saw The Babadook. And, that blew up like you wouldn't believe, all the memes.
Yeah.
And it's so embarrassing. I screamed at the midnight screening at Sundance where all the celebrities and everything. I screamed like a little bitch at one point during that movie, and I am forever embarrassed because everybody knew it was me. But that article got a lot of attention, and I moved on from there. And eventually, my editor was like, "Listen, this writer's stepping down. You expressed interest. Here you go." Mm-hmm. And so, honesty and persistence, I think, are the two things. My story, you only heard part of my story that I told you in getting to where I am now, and it's not over. And there are so many more valleys and peaks than you would think there would be. But the thing that you got to remember is that the bottom of a valley is the beginning of a peak. You guys got to kind of crawl back up there.
Well said.
Ooh, yeah.
Now going kind of piggybacking off of what Ms. Free was talking about, I guess my question would be, if you were to go and sit down with writers of multiple shows, because you had mentioned, how you used Emerald City as an example in regards to how it kind of plateaus a little bit, or they have little Easter eggs, for lack of a better expression, in the show to kind of help connect the audience with them. However, they kind of tend to plateau at the end, or they do too much, or they do too little, or they don't stick with that. Is there something that, if you could sit down with writers of your favorite shows, and what would you tell them? From a fan's point of view, or from an audience point of view, what would be words that you would say to them?
Well, definitely that, and this is to put it very bluntly and very simply, and I'll elaborate. Your viewers are smarter than you think they are. And I know it sounds like the writers are disparaging the viewers, but I feel like in screenwriting, you always kind of hear the rule of 3. If you want the audience to remember something, you have to show it to them 3 times. Well, we're living in an age where you have Tumblr and you have Twitter and you have so many different blogs. You have people analyzing television shows frame by frame to try to suss out the twists and the turns, or if there's twists and turns. Westworld, I think, is a good example where I, of course, couldn't help myself, and I'm reading theories of, is this person a host? Is what's going on with this? Blah, blah, blah. And I found that some folks would criticize the show, be like, well, it was so obvious. And I'm like, well, no, it wasn't. There was a lot of care and a lot of detail put into this. However, it was also really stretched out. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I could tell it definitely, I love Westworld, but I felt like it did sag in the middle again, and it could have been a very tight 7 episodes as opposed to the 10 it was. Mm-hmm. So that's neither here nor there. But what I would tell the writers is that they should consider writing for, obviously, internet audience makes a small fraction of the general audience, the millions that view these shows, but they should consider keeping those internet viewers in mind more, because they're going to be the loud ones, and they're going to be the ones now with all this newfangled Snapchattery and things like that. They're going to be the ones that are going to be in people's Twitter mentions being like, well, clearly in episode this, the shirt was red, but if it's not red, and I will admit on the podcast we get into that too, but some folks take it a little too seriously. But with that though, I do think that the audience is very clever now. The audience knows that television is of a higher quality than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the audience is expecting that. The audience is expecting higher production values. I kind of personally in my head call it the Game of Thrones effect, because if you think about it, pre-Game of Thrones, it was like, oh yeah, television, this is great. Post-Game of Thrones, epic television events. Oh my God, dragons, what? Question mark? Like shooting in mountains. Oh, but really, that is, I mean, think about just how you're watching a mini movie every week when you watch an episode of Game of Thrones.
Yes.
And not every show is Game of Thrones. Wait, excuse, you haven't gotten started on Game of Thrones?
I'm sorry?
Did you say you hadn't gotten started on Game of Thrones?
No, I said don't get us started on Game of Thrones, because that is like
don't get you started. Well, I enjoy it very much, and I again have thoughts in the relationship between source material and unique material, and my deep and undying hatred for the sand snakes. But don't get me started. But I mean, but that is the thing, though, is that you have pre Game of Thrones, you have post Game of Thrones, you have your Walking Dead, where you have just the elaborate makeup that goes in there, and we take that for granted. We're like, oh yeah, zombies, are on the television every day. But just think about the caliber, the movie caliber of makeup that is in every episode of Game of Thrones. That would you have thought that we would have seen that a few years ago, or not Game of Thrones, excuse me, The Walking Dead? Would you have thought that we had seen that a few years ago? Television is getting smarter and more expansive, and I feel like the writers need to be able to convey that to their viewers.
Well said. Very well said. And I think just to kind of go, because that's something that me and Ms. Free talk about a lot, especially when we review, because our top 3 shows, or I guess our top 2 shows is Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead, and then we also review, Scandal and How to Get Away with Murder, and we just recently reviewed The Magicians, but which is a fantastic show.
And that's the thing, though. The Magicians, super high production value, and I'm not going to lie to you. I got very late into Magicians, and I didn't mean to cut you off there. I'm sorry, but I got very late in the Magicians, and I had never read the books. And I honestly, and that also goes with the way things are marketed, because the way it was kind of marketed, I was like, what is this? Is this One Tree Hill with magic?
Exactly.
And it's not. And I was that first episode, and then for anybody who's thinking about getting into it, I don't want to say anything because it's all, the first season's on Netflix, so go knock it out in a weekend. But the end of that first episode sucked me in, and I was like, oh no, damn it, I have another show. But that's exactly it. It's like evil Narnia, and I love it.
Exactly.
Yes. We have to have you on. I can't. Because we will start getting into like reviews of shows, and it just becomes this. But anyway, going back to the original, like when I was talking about in regards to something that me and Ms. Free do, is one of the things that we get frustrated with, and this is going to be coming up on this week's episode, is like when one of our favorite shows like has what I call, or what me and Ms. Free call, a filler episode. And I don't mind filler episodes. I get it. I understand that, we have to keep the show going because they have a certain amount of episodes to shoot, and we have to, find out the full details of, Susan, who's on, who's a B cast member, and, she's running around doing a side quest. Nobody gives a shit. You know what I'm saying? But what bothers me about that is that it gets to a point where it starts to degrade the show itself, because you have this expectation of like, all right, last week's episode was awesome, the week before it was even more awesome, and then this week it was like, what?
Slow.
Right. It's like,
that's it. Slow. Just very slow.
Right. And then you have some shows where it will pick back up like the following week, because people are like, what the hell was that? You know what I'm saying? But then you have some shows where it just continuously has the crescendo effect, and it's like it constantly goes down. And then that's when they lose me as an audience member, because I'm like, okay, now you guys don't even care. You know what I mean? You don't give a crap about your audience. You're not like, what's the deal? So I guess my question to following that, have you been disappointed by like major shows that you followed, and how did you handle that as a audience member and also as as a entertainment journalist?
Well, I mean, I often find that the second episode of any season is going to be a letdown no matter what. I've kind of made peace with that because the first episode, that's what draws you back in. That's remember all this cool stuff that happened in the cliffhanger that we totally left off on and blah, blah, blah. And, oh, here's the other cliffhanger that we're leaving this episode on because we want you to watch the season. And then the second episode is info dump. And while that can be a little interesting, again, that is really just, you're like, okay, but there was this thing that was happening in the other 42 minutes, and now you're all sitting around a table discussing it. Like, why don't you do something?
Right.
So I've kind of made peace with that. Like, that's to be expected. I'm not, my socks will not be knocked off by those episodes. But I know what you mean when you kind of come around to more the mid-season episodes, not mid-season finale, but kind of that in between, like the first fourth of the season where it's like, okay, so now we're going to talk about Random Citizen number 14. Great. It's a little difficult because I watch a lot of international television as well. Mm-hmm. And I believe the trope is called British brevity. And, they always make the jokes about it, though. But, like, things like, what was it, Downton Abbey only had 8 episodes a season, and then it was, like, a year between production. And that worked because that did not allow you to have any filler. But average American television show, the season's, 22 episodes? So you have to have some I guess, frosting on the cake, if you will. So, honestly, I think, going back, if I could say something to the writers, it's also like cut down your seasons. But as a fan, I have been disappointed with certain episodes of my show Once Upon a Time recently. There's one in particular that I just didn't care for regarding Hook and Captain Nemo, and I won't delve too deeply into that, but it just didn't fit. It just felt like it was checking off a bunch of boxes. And that was the thing that I think bothered me the most because, at least, if you're going to put some effort into a filler episode, like, okay, color it up. But
right.
That didn't do it. You could completely excise that episode and no one would miss it. So as a fan, I rage a little. I'm like, what is going on? What's happening with my show? Why? As a entertainment journalist, I feel as if it's my job to mitigate those feelings or express them constructively to say, because, whether or not writers read the reviews, I mean, I wouldn't if I wrote a show. I would definitely, I don't have the thickness of skin to deal with that. So I understand if writers don't read reviews, but I feel like some folks do kind of, do a quick Google search. And I guess when I write those reviews about episodes that disappoint me or don't quite hit the mark, I try to use language that doesn't sound like I'm completely tearing apart because it's hard to write TV. I couldn't do it. So I appreciate their job. But at the same time, I'm also a fan and a consumer, so it's kind of, well, guys, this really didn't work because of X, Y, Z, or I was hoping to see this, we've been waiting, we as fans have been waiting for whatever, blah, 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 so we could have, that could have been folded in, like, I'm not presumptuous enough to say I'm giving writing tips, but at the same time, if I'm a fan, like, I want to see this. I guess it's more when you're writing reviews, I find it's not so much what you say, but how you say it.
Right.
And I feel like that is the most important thing when you're conveying disappointment. Like if you get a bad Christmas gift and you're like, oh, great, socks. The person who's giving you that gift is God. And to be fair, I enjoy socks. I'm at that age where I'm like, oh, socks are awesome. Yes. But you don't tell grandma, thanks for the socks. What the hell? You say, oh, this is great. Thank you. And then kind of hint all next year about the Xbox you want.
Well, and we're unfortunately running out of time because I could talk to you forever about all these awesome shows. But I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find you and stuff like that. So if you would be so kind as to tell us what your Twitter handle is, your social media apps, all that stuff. Where can people find you?
Well, well, actually, and it's funny you mentioned that because I do have something cooking that where folks can kind of find me in person, and I wanted to save talking about it for you guys. Recently, yeah.
Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really?
I have been recently asked to join the media relations team for Dragon Con in Atlanta, and I've accepted.
Congratulations!
Awesome.
Thank you. For your listeners, for your listeners who don't know about Dragon Con, it is a convention in Atlanta that happens Labor Day weekend. It is, I believe, a 4-day convention. Last year was their 30th anniversary, so they've been around for a long time. I believe they hit about 77,000 guests. And the weekend takes place between 5 hotels that are all next door to each other, right in the middle in the heart of Atlanta. And if San Diego Comic-Con was Nerd Vegas, Dragon Con would be Nerd Mardi Gras. This is the show where people go to show off the costumes that they've been working on all year. And I am very proud and excited to have been approached to join a very professional team with Dragon Con, doing PR and working with current reporters in the interview room and kind of being a liaison and making sure, everything runs smoothly behind the scenes. So I'm quite excited about that.
Right on. We're excited for you. Yes.
Thank you.
Congratulations on it. That's a big damn deal. So, that's awesome. I did have to plug this in because, things. If you guys, I'm sorry, you didn't give us a social media handle.
Sure, no problem. I really only work on Twitter. Twitter is enough social media anybody ever needs. But my Twitter handle is @mitigated text. I'm not going to spell it because mitigated is a hard word to spell, but it's mitigated text. And you could probably find me by the purple hair in my avatar.
Right on.
So come get
also
purple hair. Don't care.
Right. For those who don't, who want to hear more from Ashley Benson, you can go ahead and listen to her on her podcast with Zach Van Norman on the Once Upon a Fan podcast, which returns on Tuesday, March 7th at 5:30 p.m. on blogtalkradio.com/Once Upon a Fan. They are hilarious together, and they are just a great duo. I thought that me and Miss Free had a great chemistry. Ashley and Zach are perfect for each other when it comes to hosting. So definitely check them out. Yes, they're pretty much twins. So check them out and listen to their stuff. They're good. They have good stuff on there. So love to have you guys back on the show. We should do a big old podcast with all 4 of us one time. So that would be fun.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yes.
That would be amazing. We should. We totally should.
Yes. Well, guys, this has been another episode of Blaze Entertainment Spotlight Edition. For more episodes of our interviews, go ahead and visit entertheblaze.com. You can also find us on Twitter and, I keep saying Twitter and Facebook at Enter the Blaze. Thanks, you guys, and we are out, Miss Bree.
Bye.
Bye.